Good morning, brothers and sisters. I'm Neil Chambers. I'm a member of the Gospel Coalition Victoria Council. On the day the shops reopen in Metro Melbourne and we have moved into step 3, I'm joined this morning by Dominic Steele of the Village Church Annandale and Eugene Hoare of Grace Point Presbyterian Church in Lidcombe to talk about the practical and pastoral issues involved in reopening our churches after lockdown. Our churches don't get much in step 3. On the 8th of November, we'll be allowed to have 20 people indoors and 50 outdoors. But we are hopeful that we are moving steadily towards the last step when churches will be able to be reopened subject only to density quotients. Now, the churches in New South Wales have already made this journey, or at least they're still on it, but a long way ahead of us. So I thought I'd start by asking Dominic and Eugene to tell us a little bit about their churches and what they're doing now. What are the circumstances under which they're operating and how's it going? So
Dominic can go first.
Yep, alphabetical order. Dominic, off you go.
Well, we're in the inner city of Sydney. There's about 200 of us who are part of the family that is Village Church, a morning and an evening church. And we have been operating, we reopened as best as we're able to in mid-June, and we haven't stopped since then. There was a bit of a drop in numbers in in July, when the scare started to happen in New South Wales as a result of what happened in Victoria. But we've actually regained confidence the last few weeks, and we had a really good attendance in church last Sunday. And the government here has just allowed churches to have a maximum of 300 on the site at any one time. And we're very fortunate in this place. We have a 400 square metre auditorium, and so that has allowed us to regather in our current context.
So, Dominic, is that 300 subject to density quotients, and do you have to wear masks?
Yeah, they measure the density quotient in two ways. So they're allowing up to 300 on the 4 square metre rule. And the 4 square metre rule is measured on the public areas in the whole church building. And so when we do that on the public areas in our whole church building, so that's the foyers, the kids' space, the auditorium, we come up with a number of 185 for our whole site. And that means actually, though you go into the auditorium, and in the auditorium you're supposed to be 1.5 metres apart as you sit together. 1.5 metres apart, which means 2.25 metres of floor space to achieve 1.5 metres apart. And so that means we can have 175 people maximum in our auditorium. And so that's the way it plays out in terms of density for us.
Good. Now, Eugene, what is your church doing?
So we're actually a multi-site church. So we actually meet in 2 locations. We meet in Lidcombe. We own our own property in Lidcombe, which is an outfitted warehouse. And we meet in rented property in Burwood. And so the challenge for us is, even though we've got property, even though we've rented space, we just have not been able to fit our people. So we've got about 430 people, 70 of those are children. And so even though, I spoke to Dominic before, and Dominic's aware that, the Lidcombe property might have 3,000 square meters, most of it is parking. You can't fit 180 people back into the halls that we used to fit people into. In fact, the most we can fit in under the current restrictions is probably about 45 to 60 people. And so that's made it really hard. So we did attempt to reopen in July. We opened for 2 weeks. The rostering nearly killed us, trying to actually roster who would come and who wouldn't come. But I think because of the outbreak in Victoria and the rising numbers here, we suspended the services again. And we went down a different path to Village. We went down the path where we decided we would actually do small spaces, which is effectively encouraging our people to meet in small groups in homes, where they would do church around the live stream, and where we would actually give them liturgy documents, which means that we were putting church into the hands of our people Someone would service lead, someone would do the prayers, someone would explain the catechism, someone would lead in the creeds, someone would do the Bible reading. And the only thing we required of them was to actually watch the sermon together. That's where they would sit under the preaching of the word. So some groups do everything themselves. Other groups use the full live stream, or they use a portion of the live stream. And so we moved down a different path to Dominic. But I think for us, the big one was we couldn't bring our people back anyway with the current restrictions. Okay.
Are there restrictions on how many can meet in homes at the moment? Because they're very severe restrictions in Victoria.
Yeah, so currently I think the restriction still lies at 20. I think in July, initially I think it was 5 in a home, and then it rose to 10, and now it's currently at 20. And I think the beauty of the home, I think for us was, it's unlikely, or it'd be hard, I suspect, for the state government to actually place restrictions on what you do in the home. And so I think people have a lot more freedom to move in the home, which is why we went with small spaces.
What we've found, we're right in the inner city, and so the lounge rooms are very small. And so once you're in the home, if you've got 1.5 metres between people, even though you might have a legal limit of 20, we've got a practical limit of much smaller than that. And so we've had lots and lots of our home groups had to move to the church building. So last night, for example, we had 3 home groups meeting in the church building because the lounge rooms are too small to do home group at home.
Now, Dominic, I can see from just talking to you and Eugene that local circumstances play a significant role in how people respond to the opportunities of reopening. Is that true across the board, as in your own circles of people taking very different responses?
I think so, absolutely. And it's actually had to do with size of facilities. As Eugene said, I mean, I would say we are very fortunate. We have one big auditorium, 400 square metres, it's a big square, and it's got flexible seating. And so you couldn't actually have, and it's exactly the size to fit 100. And so my expectation, looking at Victoria, is I suspect you'll probably follow the same model as us, that you'll go from, well, small group meetings of 10 to meetings of 20 to meetings of 50 to meetings of 100. It might sit at a meeting of 100 for quite a while and then go to a larger number like 300, which is what's happened to us. And so when we were at your stage, we were wrestling as a church leadership team with what to do. And I think one of our early mistakes was we thought, we won't actually plan to restart church until we're allowed to do 100. As I think back, our people were nervous, and we were a bit nervous. We thought if we try to restart something on site with 10, or we start to try and restart something on site with 20, what's the point of that when we've got to run a much bigger live stream thing and we're only speaking to a very tiny group? But we ended up discovering that when we were ready to reopen, our people weren't quite ready to come back, in that I think people are actually, I suspect this will be the case in Victoria, it certainly was the case in New South Wales, that people were actually nervous about re-entering relationship with each other. And so what we did was, the first couple of weeks when we were allowed to have a meeting of 10, and I actually, in hindsight, think I should have been a little bit more aggressive. I said, let's have a watch party at church. Whereas instead of staying at home and watching church on the stream, you just come to this building and watch church on the stream. And that just got people used to coming into the building again. And it helped us with a tiny group of 10 to work out our COVID safe practices, put them in order, those kind of things. And then when you get to 20, you get a little bit more competent at doing that. And then when it gets to 50 and 100, you can actually really have good COVID safe practices in place.
Good. Now, I think I heard Eugene.
I'm actually with Dominic on that one, because I think when people haven't met for so long, there's a huge psychological barrier to cross. So even I think in New South Wales, even when we could have 5 in our homes, people were still hesitant even to go to someone's home to meet with them. And so I think the sooner we encourage that, for us, we worked out that's what we needed to do, encourage people to start meeting even before they gather at church, do the live stream together in people's homes. If you can gather at 10 with 10 people, do that, because that actually gives you a way to actually build up to when you actually regather, because it's a huge psychological barrier to cross. I mean, you guys have been in lockdown much longer than we have. We only had 16 weeks before we could regather. And even with 16 weeks, imagine going from your household and then walking to a room with 60 people. I think there was a lot of fears there. So I think staggering it and doing it as soon as you can actually gather in a small group, 1-to-1, 5, 10, 20, I think that would be actually, I would have done that.
Good. Now, Eugene,
and my recommendation there would be to follow the health department advice, but don't be more conservative than the health department advice, because the health department will take a conservative line themselves.
Good. Now, Eugene, I think I heard you say that one of the issues you encountered was what you called, I think, rostering, deciding who could be in the building with those small numbers. And Dominic, you must have also faced this. How did you decide who could be in the building when only 10 could be in the building or only 20 could be in the building? And so that's for you, Dominic. And Eugene, what made it so hard?
I think most of my friends, and this was our experience too, we expected it to be quite a challenge, and we expected to be kind of overrun with people, but we quickly found out that people were so nervous about coming back that we never actually got near breaking the actual limits on attendance. And what I found is a number of my peers who run larger churches than us, they would set up a system and say, you've got to be really strict, we've got to get you in, you've got to register, all that kind of thing. And then after a week or two, they were saying, it's fine, because what we found was, Christians, they're other person-centred. And so they're saying, no, that's all right, I'll step back and let you go forward. It's more important that you go back to church than me. I'll stay home. So people were being sacrificial, and we then had to start change our messaging to say, don't hold back. We've got everyone holding back. We need you to actually start to come.
That's right. We were all impressed with the Christian Tim Tam, Dominic. That was a great video. Eugene, what are the challenges that you face, and in a sense, made you decide to go down another path?
I think for us, space has always been the restriction. And so when you can only fit 60 people on a site, in virtually all our sites, and you've got to put more than 100 people down, what we did in the first 2 weeks was we rostered by our community groups. So we have got a high proportion of our people in community groups. About 84% of our church are in small groups. So we rostered. The only problem with rostering is there are people who want to come back and there are people who don't want to come back. And you've got to roster, and the people who do come back, some of them have children, some of them don't have children. So it became a logistic nightmare, because we're trying to run kids ministry as well. We're trying to restart youth ministry. We need people to serve, on Sunday in different ways. And some of them may or may not be in those community groups. So I think after 2 weeks, we realized that for us to do this for 4 services was going to be a logistic nightmare. And so I think one of the big questions we were constantly asking ourselves was, is this sustainable? So for us, we're always thinking, we weren't thinking this is going to end in a couple of months. We're always thinking, is this going to be what would be sustainable for the next 12 to 18 months? And so that's the big question for us. And even now, we're still asking those questions. What would be sustainable? And so we figured, with the current restrictions, where our numbers are capped, it wouldn't be sustainable for us to attempt to do that sort of rostering week in, week out.
Okay. Yes, we're starting to anticipate that challenge ourselves. We had a discussion about that in staff meeting, and we could not see a way forward. So it's a profound challenge for us. Yes. What were some of the other practical issues? So compliance with healthcare regulations, spacing, of buildings. How did you overcome that? Was that relatively easy, say, Dominic?
Well, there's all sorts of things that we've changed. So we've had to work out a density level for every room. And so there's a sign on every room in the building saying the maximum number of people that are allowed to be in that room. We've done things like the toilet doors are propped open so that, and a signs on the toilet doors. I'm not meaning the cubicle doors. I'm meaning the main doors to the toilet saying, please don't, we've tried to make church a contact-free, less experience. So you don't have to touch a door to go in or out of any place. The chairs are wiped down before and after a service. There's hand sanitizer at the doors. And importantly, we've got a QR code at the door. I'm not aware yet of hearing in the conversations about Victoria about registrations for attending venues, but it's been a very big thing, both for church and for cafes and restaurants, that proper registration for attending the venue has been done. And so right from the start, we set up a QR code that took you to a website and registered that you'd attended the venue. And it also, for us, it printed a name tag. And so it's actually meant that we've had exact role marking and name tags printed for everyone who's come to church since, well, we were doing that before, but we've changed to this culture of, because if you do it with a QR code, you don't have to touch the keyboard that's near the entryway to church to print out a name tag. So they've been the main ones. I suppose that the next thing is having people stay around after church. Our Premier has made some big statements against mingling. And even though you're allowed at one stage 50 in church and then 100 in church, they didn't want you to be mingling with larger groups. So that's why pubs and cafes are limited to 6, I think, in Victoria at the moment. So what we decided to do was, in our after-church communication, not say, please leave the building immediately, no mingling. What we did was take the lead from the communication to pubs and cafes, and we said, the Premier's encouraging us to limit our social interactions to groups of under 10 at the moment, and going to a pub and a cafe, it's under 10. And so we're encouraging you in church to grab a cup of coffee, come and sit down with the people around you in a group of 6 to 8. And so you're then having social time, relating with people, but you're not having shallow social time with a whole lot of people. You're having deep social time with a few. So we've been using the line at the end of church, we're going deeper with a few rather than shallow with a lot. And you know what, Neil? People have actually been staying later after church than prior to COVID because they sit down and have a really long and good and deep conversation with someone rather than 10 shallow conversations.
And I was going to say, Dominic, that's actually a brilliant idea, because I've seen other churches in New South Wales, and it's posted on their websites where they've said, come in, check in, and please leave immediately. And, and seeing that on the website, you sort of go, well, why would I bother coming? So yeah. This is one way. I mean, this is something we've been thinking as well when we regather. What will we do? Because the first 2 weeks, we actually discovered with our evening church, when the 60 of them came together, there was no social distancing after church. It's just 60 people just clumping together. And most of them, I think, were university students, so they don't adhere to these 1.5 meter things. But I think for us, it's a great teaching and equipping opportunity as well. Pushing people to grow deeper, connecting with 5 or 6 people after church, and actually doing that. And it's actually COVID safe as well.
Now, the other little thing to add to that is our culture as a church was a meal, a $5 meal after church on Sunday nights prior to COVID, and a bacon and egg roll that you paid $3 for or something before or after church on Sunday mornings. Now, when we came back after COVID, all we're doing is plastic wrapped biscuits individually. And so on Sunday morning, it was very conservative, because the culture of our church was feeling, and the slightly older congregation, very, very restrained and nervous about that. Sunday evening, a little bit more bolshy. And so what we decided to do was, rather than do home-cooked meals, $5 each, for the first 3 weeks, we ordered takeaway in, and we ordered a stack of individual takeaway serves of Thai the first week, Chinese the second week, whatever. And we charged them $10 each because we wanted them to grab a meal, go and sit in a group with 6 and have a meal. Then, after we'd done that kind of safely for one cycle, we've now reintroduced cooking and cooking our own meals after church. But we're very aware of the COVID safe practices. That's in the evening, and we've got a manageable number to do that with.
So how do you have to have space between services time? How many morning services do you have? And if you had more than one, what would have to be the space between them? We've
gone through a lot of thinking about that. At the moment, we've just been able to run the one morning service. And in fact, what we did when there was a limit of 100, we were able to say we've got 100 adults who come to this building, and we ran a completely separate children's program with no mingling between the two in a separate space. And people checked into the children's program, went to the children's program. So the way we did it was our children's program started at 9:20 a.m. and our adult program started at 9:30 a.m. Our adult meeting finished at 10:45 and our children meeting started at 11:30. And so the parents finished at 11:30. And so the parents finished church and then went over to 45 minutes later to pick up their kids. But that was how we dealt with the number of people on the site on Sunday morning when the limit was 100. We were going through angst about whether or not we would, and we actually went through the whole modelling procedure of splitting the morning church in half, working out which community groups we'd asked to come to the 9 a.m. service, which ones we'd asked to come to the 11, how we'd staff the kids' church. We went through a long process of working that all out. And then we decided, or we worked out actually, so few people were coming at the beginning that it wasn't necessary to do that. And we would have ended up having 20 adults in each service and 5, 10 kids in each service. And so actually it was better to start with the smaller numbers, and then when it actually grew to the size that we then had a problem, then we would have the discussion about whether or not we'd need to put on another service. And we were just starting to think about it when the government increased the limit to 300, and now we haven't had to think about it. And I actually expect that the nervousness in your church and how people start to feel more confident about coming to church will probably end up running parallel to the speed with which the government relaxes the restrictions.
Okay, thanks. Eugene, on your model, what have you done about children and youth work? Because it's a lot of months.
Yeah, so we've got, what we've done is, I think when COVID first started, because we couldn't have a Sunday school and everything was in isolation, we took the Sunday school material, and we packaged it. And what we did was we released it to parents. And so we said to parents, especially when we couldn't meet it, even in small groups and people meeting in their homes, when we're really in lockdown, we saw it as an opportunity to encourage parents to take responsibility for teaching their own kids. And so our Sunday school director took the material. Every week we would release it, and we would say, here's the kids' church material. We don't just have the study, we've got the craft, we've got the video, everything's there for you. And so we've encouraged parents to take responsibility of that. What we've subsequently done, I think as COVID has moved, I think after the first 16 weeks, we thought, look, we want to do something for the children. We still couldn't meet at that stage. So what we did was we put together a half an hour kids talk, kids praise segment. So our teams would pre-record that. And we would get all the kids at church together on Zoom half an hour before the main church service. And so the kids get to see other kids. We would have a live host, and we would do the kids praise and the kids talk, which were pre-recorded. And so that allowed the kids to interact. So that's what we've been doing. And what we're now doing is with small spaces, we're encouraging families to take their children along to small spaces. And we're asking families, individuals there, to roster themselves to run the kids program. So, it could be 3 families meeting together in a small space because they've got the Sunday school material. They could roster, and each parent could take turns in the coming weeks to actually do the Sunday school with the 4 or 5 kids present. So that's what we've done with kids ministry. That's how we do it in our small spaces. There is half an hour before, and then there's a kids program that we resource them to run. For youth, our youth, I'm still meeting online. And so our youth meet after church. Our youth leaders meet with them on Zoom. More recently, our youth leaders have met with them face-to-face, not so much to do Bible studies. I think getting them back has also been difficult because I think parents have been reluctant to actually let them come along or let them leave. And so I think more recently they've started after church socials with some of our youth, and the different youth leaders have actually been organizing that. So that's what we've been doing.
We should say, Neil, that just picking up on what Eugene just said then, there's definitely, you've obviously picked it up from us. There's been a reluctance of people to come back. We are still not yet back at our full strength. And I was talking to 2 senior ministers of significant churches last week, and they both told me that, that both of their churches be 600-800 in attendance on prior to COVID, and they both said we've lost about 200 people that are just missing. And Eugene, you were telling me you've had some similar discussions with peers.
Yeah, I had a chat with the Presbyterian minister of a larger church, and he's told me that 100 people have just disappeared. They do Zoom church, but they've just lost 100 people.
Now we are thinking now at this stage. I think for us, our attendance drop has not been as small as that, and I know that Eugene's hasn't either. And I think that's because both of our churches had people in really tight, vast majority of the church in pastoral care small groups before COVID happened. But the churches that really have suffered, I think, are the churches where the people weren't locked into community groups before we went on this journey. But even so, we have lost people. And it's the people who were disconnected or on the fringe of our church beforehand. It's even harder to get them back now.
Good. And we might talk about that. But a prior question, both of you, in a sense, rely heavily on your community group, your growth group, your small group leaders. Have you been doing anything extra during this time to support and sustain them? And do you anticipate that they will actually need a bit of extra support after this time? That is, that they're getting tired.
Our community group leaders, our community group leaders have been exhausted. I think we've realized that they've been exhausted because a lot of their work has been pastoral care, chasing people up, finding out how people are. And Zoom is actually not the best way to actually do that. It's actually quite exhausting. So you can imagine, if you're a worker, you spent the whole day on Zoom, in Zoom meetings, and then to have to do that again after work. So I think it's been exhausting and incredibly draining. And so I think if I were to do things differently, one of the things I think we should have done is, I don't think we had equipped our community group leaders to do pastoral care in a COVID context, or do it better. And so for us, one of the changes for us going into next year is, the focus for us is how do we actually better help our community group leaders do pastoral care, because we suspect, I think you learn from the past and you sort of go, I think, look, we got to help them better care for people, whatever the circumstances. So I think that was a big one for us. People are exhausted because they're constantly chasing people up, trying to work out how do I keep people connected in the circumstances we find ourselves in. And, I think some people feel responsible as well, that people have dropped off, and what do they do about that? And we've got to help them work out what to do.
Good. Dominic?
I think for us, the several things have been, people have marked the role on a little app, on a fluoro app, on Wednesday nights. They've marked the role during the COVID season when people were all at home. they'd watch church together and then have a Zoom discussion afterwards. And the leaders would mark the roll for Sunday morning as well. We've run the same studies on the midweek small group as for church, and that's been one of the ways to try and hold the whole church together. When we're all so disparate, the more things we can do to hold us together as to unify us, the better. And our maturity pastor has prepared a kind of a 4-minute video each week that's just gone to the community group leaders saying, here are the key points, this is what you want to bring out on the study that we've written for you. Here are the issues that we want you to raise in discussion about our church life together. So each of our 20 community group leaders have been given a little 4-minute video each week on how to play your part best as a village community group leader. And I think that's helped them feel loved by us and also paddle in the same direction that we want to go in.
I'm thinking, we should have had this discussion in March. Would have been very helpful. But now, as you've just alluded to, this experience and then returning has exposed, maybe created, but perhaps also exposed a number of pastoral issues in the lives of our congregation. In your experience, what have been those issues, and how have you been going about, in a sense, encouraging people to keep persevering, and persevering in meeting with their brothers and sisters particularly? Who'd like to go first?
You go first, Eugene.
I mean, this is the reason why we went down the small spaces path. Not being able to gather or bring everyone back meant that we had to think really, really carefully about, most of our people are already in community groups. So for us, it was, what do we do with corporate worship on Sunday? We can keep people watching the live stream, but we didn't think that's ideal. We're not convinced that there's such a thing as a virtual church. There needs to be a physical gathering. And so I guess the question for us pastorally was, was there a way to do Sunday church where our people would be able to meet under the preaching of the word, with the freedom to actually engage with God in prayer and praise, where they could serve, because, in COVID, no one was serving at home, where they could serve in community and experience community, where they could do mission together. So I think pastorally, that's what was taking away from people. Gathering, praise, community, ministry to one another, and mission. And so for us, the pastoral solution for us, because of the restrictions, I suspect I would have taken a different path if we could fit all our people back into the church building, was to go down the small space, because the small space gave us the opportunity for people to gather under the preaching of the word. It gave us an opportunity as well to get our people serving, because when they come to a small space, they've got to serve. Someone has to do the Bible reading. Someone's got to do the prayer. Someone's got to prepare the catechism and explain Heidelberg Catechism, question 36. This is what it means. And some groups, musicians who previously weren't doing anything because only one service was running in the live stream, they were now actually serving in the small space. They were playing music. They were leading. So people were serving. I wasn't convinced bringing people to Sunday church with 45 people there, not being able to sing, not being able to stay and have extended fellowship. I didn't believe that was a great mission opportunity. It's not a place I'd want to invite, want people to invite their friends to. But the small space we believe would afford that opportunity, because inviting people to a small space where they would not just hear the gospel, but experience community, and extended community around meals, perhaps, after lunch or dinner, after church in a small space. And that would be a much better evangelistic strategy. And so pastorally, that's where we've pushed our people to see the small space as a place where they would gather each Sunday, engage with God in worship, serve together in community, experience community, and actually do mission. So I think that's how we address the big challenges pastorally caused by isolation. And I think Dominic has, I think that's the reason why Dominic's pushing real hard as well for regathering. It's just that we regather in different ways.
Yeah, I'm totally with Eugene that in the time that you're in isolation, you actually grow spiritually lethargic for most of our members, in that we actually aren't exercising our gifts to serve and build up the body of Christ. And so what Eugene's really articulated is, as quickly as possible, we want to be getting people to be engaged in serving each other. And he's done it through the small space. We've gone for the slightly bigger space. I think when you're just sitting on your hands and you're not contributing to the building of the body of Christ, you start to become introspective, you start to navel gaze, you start to become critical, and you start to whinge. And so when you say what pastoral issues have come to the surface, they're the kind of issues, and actually relationship fractures that might have been little cracks before have got a little bit wider when we're not actually seeing each other face to face. So as we start to see each other face to face, we realise I'm not the dragon that you thought I was, because I was a little bit curt in some remark that you heard me make online, and I've actually smiled and given you well, I'm not allowed to give you a hug, but given you a kind of fist bump or something. We can forgive each other and move on. But I think where we've seen people start to serve is, and remarkably, we picked up a whole, while some of our members were nervous about coming back to church, we had a parallel thing of a whole lot of people who had checked us out online and in the crisis of COVID reached out for God and been eavesdropping on our services online start to turn up in our physical meetings. And so at the beginning of term 3, and remember, we really just opened with 100 people in July. So a couple of weeks later, we started an Introducing God course. And the Introducing God course we ran physically, so this is not digitally anymore, but physically, we had 25 guests, which is our biggest term 3 Introducing God course in, I don't know, a decade or something. And I think it was mostly people who'd been checking us out online. That course has just finished with 18 people coming out of that course. We got to the end of it. We had to run it in our auditorium because we had to run people so physically far apart for the discussion groups, whereas normally we'd run it in a much smaller room than that. We got to the weekend away for Introducing God, and instead of them all going away as a big group of 18 guests plus 6 leaders, we had to run 3 Introducing God weekends away, each with 10 people in, and they've just finished over the last 2 or 3 weeks. And so actually, by getting people serving in evangelism and them actually seeing the evangelism work, we've just been reminded that the gospel is powerful, and our church is starting to buzz again.
Yes, that's very encouraging. We've been running Simply Christianity online so far. And Eugene, what have you been doing by way of evangelism through this time?
I mean, we've tried a whole host of things. We've tried Zoom events. I think we did that in the early days of COVID. I think for us, we saw COVID as an opportunity to do 2 things. 1, to equip our people for evangelism, and 2, to create opportunities. So in our minds, those are the 2 things we're constantly thinking of. How do we equip? How do we create opportunities? So on the equipping end, our missions pastor, our M pastor for mission, what he did over the COVID period was he visited every single community group. All of them were online. He visited every single community group. And what he did was he attended to actually to encourage them and to equip them in COVID evangelism. So that's what he did. So I think we've got about 34 groups. He visited every single one of them. That's what he did to equip them. And then he created opportunities. So I think we did some online events where people could invite friends to. We tried to do a Simply Christianity thing. That was we didn't have uptake on that. We probably only had 2 or 3 people come to that. But what we have found is when we started small spaces, we found people would bring friends to small spaces. And so I found that incredibly interesting, because I turn up as a small space and then I'd meet people that I'd never seen before who weren't Christian. And they'd say, oh, we've been watching your live stream online with our friends on Zoom, which was fascinating for me. And then now they're meeting in a small space. And so that's how we've done it. We've encouraged people in the early days to do church on Zoom, watch the live stream together with their non-Christian friends. And then now we'd say to them, bring your friends along to small spaces, because that's where they won't just hear the word, they'll experience Christian community. Yeah, so that's what we've been doing. So,
but Eugene, your big issue, I think, is the density. I mean, you just can't gather your people in your building until the density restrictions change. If you were able to gather people in the building, like the density restriction went down to 2 meters per person rather than 4 square meters per person, would you then try to be bringing people back together?
Yeah, that's a real hard question, Dominic. I think we'd like to bring people together. So if we dropped to 2 square meters, straight away our numbers would double. So that would be significant for us. I think the challenge for us is still the issue of not being able to sing. And so, which is why the question we're constantly wrestling with is there a way for us to do Sunday church where our people will be able to meet, not just under the preaching of the word, but where they're able to engage with God in prayer and praise openly, where they'll be able to serve one another freely, experience community freely, and actually do mission that's effective. And so I think for us, we suspect that the singing restrictions is a real big one for us, because we don't think it's actually the full expression of what it means for us to gather. And so we suspect next year when we do regather, I'm hoping the restrictions on the 4 square meter rule will drop. We suspect some of our small spaces will continue and others will actually regather. So that's what we suspect. But I think what we want to do with our small spaces, we only want to encourage the strong small spaces to continue meeting, because we now see those small spaces as an opportunity to plant in a new suburb. So I think so for us the strategy is slightly changing now. Yeah.
It's been interesting, Neil, as I detect what's going on in Victoria. Singing, I haven't heard of yet having been a major discussion point on your side of the border, but it's been a major issue for us in New South Wales. And I expect that there'll be a point when the Victorian Health Department puts a ban on singing in church, and you'll have to navigate this space as well. What we've been allowed to do here is we've been allowed to have platform singers. People have been... Only now we're just starting to talk about not wearing masks to church, but we had platform singers, people wearing masks to church. In our church, we've been encouraging people to hum vigorously, and actually, I'll just show you this. This is our little basket of egg shakers, and one of our guys bought hundreds of, well, not hundreds, but quite a lot of these little egg shakers. And so people have found, as I'm sitting in church and I'm not allowed to sing, but I'm humming along behind my mask, to actually be able to shake that shaker in time does help me to reflect on the words and engage in a way that I didn't before. And so I've actually found, I was a bit skeptical when the guy first raised it and started to make it happen, one of our members. But actually, it's been really good, particularly for our morning church, in terms of people feeling like they were engaged in the music.
Yes, I think I heard you online, maybe at the last service, confessing to not being particularly coordinated, Dominic. So that was good. I think you're right. In Victoria, we, in a sense, are looking at the unknown. We know the government will create much more specific guidelines when they actually do get to the last step. At least I anticipate that. And as they've been extremely deliberate and controlling at every stage, I suspect they'll be quite detailed. And the issue we're facing... And I was saying the issue we're facing is they are perhaps even more nervous about what goes on at home. the less controlled the environment, the more restrictive they are. So that's the issue we're facing as we come to reopen our buildings. Now, Dominic, you say something, then I've got a couple of final questions. Yep.
Yes, I think I'd be just noting we've had a similar experience. I'm hearing from my Victorian friends angst over the unfairness that you're allowed to do this in a cafe but not this in a church. We have found all the way through the relaxation of restrictions that the New South Wales Health Department has been more restrictive on the volunteer groups like churches than they have been on the commercial entities. And I think it's because the commercial push is heavier, higher, louder, and they want to get the economy moving, whereas they don't care about the well-being issues and they don't care about the faith issues. And so I do think we have to be agitating loudly for parity between what's allowed in the commercial venue, whether it's a wedding reception or a function centre, or a corporate function centre, and the churches. And we have to be arguing what is true, that we are good citizens, that the Christian people are being responsible, and we can be trusted. And we can be trusted, actually, I would see what was happening in church, and it has been all the way along. Every church I've been to in New South Wales has been more conservative in their behaviour than I've seen in the cafes, the pubs, the shopping centres. And so we're being much, much more responsible, and yet the restrictions are also tougher on us. And you've got to keep agitating, or they'll just leave you as highly restricted.
Well, I think that's the case. Leaders of denominations, so for example, our own moderator has already addressed in a letter the Premier on this, and is trying to agitate with the leaders of other churches to have us at least on parity with hospitality. And I think the sad thing is they think making money is a higher motivation to care than actually loving. Whereas communities of love that have leadership and a disciplined commitment to seeking the well-being of others do keep the rules, because we actually want people. We want their whole well-being, which includes, of course, nurturing their souls. Now, I've got a couple of more questions. You both have staff, so the first question will be, having alluded to how tiring it is on Zoom, how have you sustained your staff? But the second question will be, how have you sustained yourselves? Because there are a lot of churches in Victoria that have only one pastor and one member, and in a sense, one member of their pastoral team. And I don't know how you found it, but I found this whole thing quite exhausting, just trying to stay. So take it in turns. How have you gone sustaining your staff? And then how have you gone sustaining yourself through all the decisions, the thinking and the decisions that have to be made to get people keeping going through this time and keeping coming back?
I guess there's two issues for me there. There's the Word of God and prayer, and there's rest. On the Word of God and prayer, at the start of COVID, I thought I want to be... I just decided to make a daily Bible time, a little 5-minute daily Bible time at 7 o'clock in the morning. And so I've just been getting up at 6 and preparing a little 5-minute Bible talk to go out at 7. And I actually think that hour in the Bible has been really good for me during this whole time. I mean, I was doing quiet times before, but they weren't as long and they weren't as thoughtful. And so that's been a significant thing for me. And then encouraging our members to come together around daily Bible time. I think we were under where I would have liked us to have been in personal reading of the Bible as a church. And so I've been trying to use this as a moment to increase not just my own, but our whole membership's trusting of God and looking to God to guide and lead us through this. But on the rest subject, our parish council said to us very early on, when we were very worried about money and it was before JobKeeper came out, they said one of the areas that our staff can contribute is by not banking holidays during this time. And who wants to go on holidays when there's nowhere to go? but actually we want you to go on holidays, to keep using your holidays up during this time. And so I've had 2 weeks off during this season. They haven't been particularly good. The first week I painted the house, and the second week I cleaned out my mother-in-law's flat. But at least they were mental breaks from what I was doing. And I've really strongly encouraged our staff to be. I've said to them, by the time we get to October, I want you to have had the normal amount of holidays that you would otherwise have had, so that you are as rested as you can be. And in fact, this week we've got 2 staff members on holidays. And so there's my short answer.
Eugene?
Exactly the same thing Dominic said. I think there were 3 things: the word, prayer, and rest. God's word does God's work. And I think COVID season taught me that personally. I like things planned. I like to know where we're going. I like the calendar. COVID threw all of that out the window. And so it drove me to the word, and I think of Proverbs. It drove me to Proverbs, actually, Dominic. That's what it did. Neil, it drove me to Proverbs because I figured I needed wisdom, more wisdom than I ever needed in ministry. And I think it's Proverbs 28 or 29 that says, I am stupid and I need his word. I think the CSB actually says that I'm a stupid man and I need God's word, because only God knows what he's doing and only God can actually bring life. And so it drove me more and more to the word. And that has helped me. It's reminded me truths, the promises of God have kept me in the last 8-9 months. The church is his. He's the chief shepherd. He holds his people in his hands. He will sustain them. He will keep them. So those truths have been really, really helpful for me in the season I found myself in. It's also helped me not carry the burden. I think as people who lead churches, we feel like the burden falls on us. And I think the burden is too big for any pastor to carry. In fact, I've learned we cannot carry it. The chief shepherd must carry it. He is the chief shepherd. Truly, he is the chief shepherd. It drove us to prayer. So one of the things it did was it made us a lot more dependent as a staff team. So one of the things we did was I said to the staff, look, we're going to get together every week now, 1 o'clock to pray. We're just going to meet every Friday, which we still do. And I think that's going to continue into next year. We meet every Friday to pray for each other and to pray for people in the church. And we just pray for people. There's no set agenda. We just meet for an hour and we just pray. So it's driven us to prayer. Like Dominic, we encourage our staff to actually take their leave. We said, you got to go on leave. There's always things to do in the COVID season. Ministry is endless. So you've got to actually take your leave. Your kids on holidays, school holidays, take leave, spend time with them. I think the big one for us in helping our staff was actually being clear, trying to work out what the real ministry priorities were in the COVID weeks, as we moved from lockdown, as we sought to go back to church, as we did small spaces, work out what the priorities are, because so many of the things we were looking to do, we were no longer going to do. And so helping the staff navigate not just the plans, but what was required of them to put in place new ministry plans. We had to be sensitive about that because many of us were not familiar with how to navigate the technology, to think through what the challenges would be because people hadn't met for a long time. So the kinds of stuff we're thinking through, it was very high stress, I suspect, for some staff members. I mean, Dominic might be able to add more to that.
I think the other little thing that I just thought of as you were speaking, Eugene, was we're a staff team that for the last decade has all worked out of the one office. And so when COVID happened and we stopped working from the one office, I think actually my biggest fear for our church was that with us all working from home, we might get grumpy with each other, because so much of the relational glue in our team happens from working from the same space. And it's meant that I haven't had to, as a leader, think particularly intentionally about how to make that relational glue work. And so when the government started to relax things and allow us to to restart doing things again, one of my first decisions was to say to the staff, I want you to start working from the office again. Because the reason that the government was hesitant about pressing go about people going into offices was not because of what was going to happen in the office, but what was going to happen on public transport on the way. But the public transport wasn't an issue for our church staff team because they all just live within a few blocks of here. And so there was nothing holding us back from working together in the office, and therefore our relationship getting better. And therefore, if we're comfortable in this building and making sure that we're used to doing COVID safe practices in this building, then that will trickle into the congregation.
And part of that, Dominic, I suspect, is when you're in the office and you're rubbing shoulders with staff, so much of ministry is done over those quick conversations as you have coffee with people. But suddenly when you're working from home, what actually happens is you're sending emails, you're sending text messages. And the problem with COVID was that people are receiving so many of that, no one actually reads them because there's just so much information flowing, not just both ways, but from everywhere else. And so it's hard to actually have those quick ministry conversations and get people on the same page.
Good.
So I'd be saying, Neil, for you, the sooner you can get your staff back into the common office, the better.
Okay. Well, we mainly work from home. We've actually never been able to have a common office. I was listening, and I think I might have to get them back for a common lunch. Something to think about. Now, I just like you to think now about the Singleton pastor. He's had his church shut down, somehow been able to keep things going a little online, and he's now facing reopening. What words of
my advice to that, guys, well, firstly, I admire you. I don't have the gifts to do it on my own. I can see that I'm quite good in some areas, but I have such profound weaknesses in other areas. If I was on my own, I would personally just spiral down. So you've got my full admiration. My first tip would be you want to try and get people together as soon as you can. If you're on your own, you probably aren't dealing with huge numbers of people. The tension for you will be, I think, what do I keep doing for the people who don't want to come yet? And I haven't got the personal resources to put together a pre-recorded thing and do a church meeting on Sunday. And so I would be saying to you, just set up a one camera at the back, you could even be just an iPad at the back. And one of my friends, he's just down the road from here, he's been working to get everybody back to his church building. He's got the iPad up the back of his church, and when they have the little break in the middle of the service where they say chat with your friend, he just walks over to the iPad and does a little 60-second hello to the people who are still watching from home. But it's showing people that you can come back to the building. They're seeing some of their friends in the crowd. They're seeing that it's safe. They're seeing that the chairs are far enough apart. But I just don't think you're going to be able to do pre-recorded thing on Thursday and be able to front up to do live services on Sunday. And I just can't see that you've got the energy to do that. So you've got to work out just how to send out one service to the people who are physically present and the people who are watching from home. Yeah, that's right.
Eugene?
I pretty much say the same thing Dominic has said. I think it's working out. If you're a pastor, if you're the solo pastor of the church, you've got to work out what those priorities are, because there's so many things that we've had to do in COVID. And even in a church like us, we've got resources. We had to decide whether we would do one or the other, pre-recorded or live. We definitely could not do both. And so in the early days, we pre-recorded. In fact, we thought we were going to be like Victoria, because we thought we were going to be like Victoria. When we suspended our services in March, we had pre-recorded I think about 20 to 40 songs, our music team, and pre-recorded everything. We pre-recorded sermons till the end of May because we weren't sure what kind of lockdown we'd have. And so I think now we just do the live stream. But I think if you're the solo pastor, you've got to work out what those priorities are, because you just can't do everything. And, you know, I'd want to say to the solo pastor, you don't have to do everything. You really don't have to do everything. And it's reasonable, because Jesus is still the chief shepherd. You are the under shepherd. You've got to work out what you can do with the gifts and the capacity God has given you. And I've known pastors who've done a whole range of things, you know, like I think when we were deep in lockdown, people in nursing homes couldn't come out to actually church. They couldn't even turn up at community groups. We couldn't even visit them. I've known pastors who picked up the phone and who would actually call people in nursing homes. So I think, you know, if you're a solo pastor, love and care for your people in the best ways that you can do. You know, just do what you can and trust that God will do the rest.
Okay, now we are about to wind up. Final words of encouragement or warning, or?
I'd just say don't delay. It's better to get going, to make some mistakes now in reopening than delay it. On Monday, I went to a funeral at a small church in the suburbs, and it was their first public meeting that they've had. And actually, they made so many mistakes and you will make mistakes when you run your first public meeting. But much better to make the mistakes now with a tiny group of 10 when everyone's making mistakes than 3 months later when I go in and think, oh, what are you guys doing? You don't know what you're doing at all. And all our other churches have been running for 3 months, you know. So I'd say, have a go, start, reopen. This is the season to regather the sheep, and don't think that too many are going to come. That won't be your problem.
Eugene?
Yeah, I'd want to encourage those listening to find ways to gather with people. You might not be able to gather in a large space, but you certainly can gather, you know, in the park. I noticed that in Victoria, you can meet 20 to do church in the park, or you can do, I think you might be able to do 10 in a home or something, or it's 10 in the church building currently. So I'd say I'd encourage them to regather in as many different ways as possible. Regather in the homes, regather in your small groups, do church in the park, because the sooner people get used to gathering, the sooner you'll transition back to church in whatever form you take. That will actually be much easier for people.
Yes, Dominic.
And we need to note, Neil, we have to do that because we actually don't know if it's going to get worse again. This might be the good moment before it gets worse again. And so we started to gather in July, and then when the virus levels started to go up in New South Wales again in August, it looked like we were going to shut down. For a season, it was looking like we were going to shut down in New South Wales, just like you have in Victoria. And I was thinking, wow, if we have to shut down again, I'm so glad we had a month of being open. You know, and so we shouldn't just assume it's all going to be rosy from now. We should assume this could go on up and down for a while, and so push the boundaries as far as you can under the regulations that the health department allows.
Okay, I think that's helpful. I should just say for Victorians, when you're gathering outside for a religious meeting, it has to be with a faith leader, and a faith leader is fairly tightly defined as far as we can tell. That is, we think it probably is somebody who's employed or in training to be.
So it can't be a Bible study group leader, Neil?
We have no confidence that it can be a Bible study leader. We're not even sure in our context it can be an elder, even though that there is a phrase that may allow some room, but we're not even sure how we can get clarification of that.
I was going to say, Neil, Dominic's been incredibly helpful for our church, because we've watched what Village has been doing since March. And so a lot of the COVID safe practices we've adopted from Village Church, and I'm pretty sure Dominic's happy to make that stuff available. I'm also happy to make our liturgy documents available if anyone wants to have a look at what we do, because that might actually help churches that are doing the live stream, planning on meeting small groups in homes to do church. So I suspect whatever we have available, we'd be happy to make available and people can do whatever they want with them.
Now, Dominic, is that right? What would people email you and Eugene if we put your
Sure. My whole philosophy in Christian my whole philosophy in Christian ministry is that the more we share with each other, the more we don't need to be reinventing the wheel. And if we've had a good idea or you've had a good idea, I want to borrow from you and want you to borrow from us.
Yeah.
Good. Well, thank you very much for your time. And
thanks very much for having us, Neil, and we continue to pray for you and the ministry of Jesus in Victoria.
Yeah, that's right, and that the Lord Jesus will bring honour and glory to himself through this time, through his people. Thank you for being with us.